Hello, everybody. Hello, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. Okay, folks. Great music, but I'm gonna mute the music. I'm turn the music off for this review. And turn the HVAC system off. You'll be able to hear me better. So we saw white gain control, not really till very late, but have established a lead quite early, and the game graph shows there were, a lot of different spots of this game were strongly contested. So that being in mind, normally I would think 76 and 67 accuracy, yeah, kind of on the low side, right? But let's take a look through this game. I think even if it says, both sides are inaccurate below 80, that there might still be reason to review the game. There might be there's some action. It was a contested game. I played the King's Gambit. My rule of thumb in the King's Gambit is move 3, knight f3. If, here it's white's to make his third move. Capture on f4, whatever black does here, black's second move, accept the gambit, decline the gambit this way. There's a couple other ways. I mean, you might consider bishop e7, but these three ways are, I believe, the most common ways for black to decline the king's gambit, and then, of course, accepting the gambit. Whatever, knight to f3 on move 3. White plays knight f3 on move 3. Because it doesn't matter how black declines or if black accepts, white still cannot allow queen h4 check. Okay, so I played move 3, knight f3. Now, pawn takes f4. Now we've sort of shimmied into a king's gambit accepted. That's one way to do the king's gambit accepted, is to delay the acceptance, delay the capture on f4. Pawn to d4. I like this move because it establishes a strong pawn duo. Even if there's a black pawn on f4, this is still strong for white. And white has an opportunity perhaps to capture on f4, equalize material, and develop all the while. And for that reason, I think bishop e7 is not is a bad move. This is a bad move. It's not active enough. I understand that bishop b4 check will get met with pawn to c3, and then these other moves aren't really in either, so look to a different piece. Bishop e7 allows, for instance, bishop takes f4, and just most likely a better move would be g5. Yeah, I don't know if there are all that many other great moves there for black. Let's see what torch 4 suggests. G5 is high, I would know that. F5. This is, now we're in the category of certifiably insane openings. That both sides have a busted up kingside pawn structure. It's the fourth move, and I guess that partially explains why neither king has castled. This game will be nuts. F5 for really pretty much a tactical struggle, a tactical game. But bishop e7's calmer, I'll give it that. But I would say, yeah, some of these suggestions by Torch, g5, f5. There's also the suggestion knight f6, which I thought of, but isn't e5 pretty strong? Maybe I'm missing something, but it looks like e5 is strong against that. up the maximum time because let's move it and then see why it's not listed. Oh, because it's not white's turn to move. Torch after bishop e7 likes a lot of these bishop moves. What was e5 responding? Oh, knight f6. Now e5. Yes, there we go. e5 is now one of the best two moves, and it is indeed a dynamic way for white to counter in the center. So that's that. Bishop e7. Bishop captures on f4. Bishop h4 check. g3. I thought about this move for a while. 9:46. Yeah, about 21 seconds. I chose g3 because I thought it sort of turns the tables on bishop h4 check. Now it's the bishop who's under attack. It's black's dark squared bishop that might be lost from the game. It's protected once and only once, and by the queen. That the move g3 will push that bishop somewhere else. On the other side, from considering black's move bishop h4 check, g3 is a good move, except that now there's even more air. When white castles, when white castles and it's not clear he's going to castle kingside anymore, because there's now a lot of air around white's king. The current king doesn't want any heirs nearby. The current king wants to be firmly in control. So anyway, I played pawn to g3 and just pushed the bishop back. Both sides can claim something from that. Now I have a nice place for my bishop on g2. I've pushed my opponent's bishop back, and black, for his part, they part, played bishop h4 check, but then and induced this move that could be argued weakens the squares around a white kingside castle. So we'll see. That's this part of the game. Both sides made progress on the same full move on the same two tempi. That's why it's a game, because one side thinks that inducing this weakness is better, and the other side thinks that getting a square for my bishop is better. Having a pot shot at my opponent's bishop is better, and all those things. So let's see. I played. So that's a minor battle. This is not a huge deal. It's interesting. It's nuanced, and it helps shape the game. But for instance, bishop c4. And the next move here it is white's turn to move. Bishop c4. I think is good in conjunction with the follow-up I gave, pawn to c3, and then this battery. But on its own, it can probably be refuted. And torch suggests d6 or d5, and then simple development. After any of these moves, white is still doing fine. No, the word I gave away about 4/10 of a pawn, according to Computer Best move. A c3 is just it's a setup move. It's not a good move on its own. c3 is a lousy move on its own. It's when it's paired with a follow-up like queen to b3. Now it makes more sense. We've got a very strong center. We've got this battery that, if it were white's turn to move, would be pretty much totally dominating the chessboard. And my opponent played queen to f6. I would have thought bishop takes f4, frankly. See, that's a little bit too good for white on torches to say so. But bishop takes f4, pawn takes f4. Maybe my opponent's viewing these pawns in the center here as way too controlling, way too powerful, to just let 3 pawns control the center like that. Or just with queen to f6, it might be let's pile on and if it's black's turn to move again, or white miscalculates, then bishop takes f4, pawn takes f4, queen takes f4, and black will have lost bishop against bishop and a pawn, and have a really wildly good spot, beyond good, wildly great spot for the queen at f4. Here she's threatening on e4 with check. She's threatening the undefended knight on f3. A lot of these pieces are out of the way, so she's threatening check on h4, and she's helping to protect f7. This queen is beautiful. Look at this, all the work she's doing. Here, maybe not quite as much so, but let's go through that variation we thought of. It's white's turn to move, so then, white, knight d2 kind of does a lot against that, but I think it's the best move. Let's see if it's considered a good move. In inaccuracy, alright, fine, we'll live with that. Then we capture, and this might be a better move, but we're focusing on piece quality. With queen takes f4, this knight is protecting two targets. There's some air, there's a lot of air around white's king, and she's helping to protect f7. So I would say this queen is very, very strong. And remember, knight d2 doesn't sort of scream for itself here on move 11 or move 10 for white, and white ends up losing a pawn as well. So, you also the black queen's gonna be. Did I say white? Remember, the black queen's gonna be even stronger if white misses the move knight d2 and maybe a couple other great moves. This is considered an inaccuracy, but let's be honest, this holds things together. Okay, that's against practice. Let's go here. We're back here. I wanted stability, and I thought if I lose my undefended knight and take off this bishop that's pressuring in a way that's otherwise maybe mildly difficult to assail and slightly difficult to assail, I said just get rid of that bishop. And now black has these pretty badly doubled pawns on the g file, and after kingside castle, maybe I was playing a little bit of hopeful chess that this discovery where we have equal material, black and white, but with black's turn to move, I was counting on g takes f4, rook takes f4, with winning a tempo against the queen. And when the queen settles herself, it depends a lot on where she settles herself. She might choose e7 or g6 to help control f7. g6 is these would be bad, mostly just maybe e7 still in, but g6 is out because of bishop takes f7 check, and there's enough, and the bishop's also attacking where the queen is, and there's enough firepower behind it that my opponent's gonna lose her or they queen. So let's see where my opponent chose knight to a5, which is so as per the game. We'll show that as per the game how that doesn't come quite to it. Twitch has b5 and g takes f4 in mention. I was kind of calculating with g takes f4, but then with b5 kind of takes the wind out of white's sails. We have to use a move to break up this wonderful battery on b3 and c4, or else we're getting our bishop attacked, and it will cost a move to recapture rather than have my queen attacked. So All this is that maybe castle's kingside wasn't the greatest move here for white. There's some. Look at all this space around. I noticed during the game, queen h6 leaves white with a lot of questions to be answered. Bishop takes f7 and takes so. Yeah, white has to capture on f7 to figure out how to recollect his pieces there. All right, so this is a tough situation. Black didn't find the winning move. Knight a5 is a good-looking move. It just doesn't work exactly right. And you can see here that white has one move that wins, and all the others are quite bad. So it forces white to play accurately. And so I captured on f7. The queen captures. Queen captures again. Of course the king captures. And now with the discovered check, bishop takes c7, check from the rook. King moves, and the bishop's got the knight at a5. Right, so we're now ahead by a piece to a pawn. I'm looking to wipe out counterplay and pick up pawns and pieces when I can. I'm looking to wipe out counterplay, trade equal value pieces, and pick up pawns and material when I can. Also king safety, of course, then also king safety. So I play e5. I mean, it's a great move for a number of reasons, one of which is when the knight moves, doesn't want to lose himself to this pawn. Then rook to f8 forces a trade of material. You think that these trades in material, like this one, they're kind of like, sometimes they're worth as much as a pawn. Not really, but like you prioritize them with almost that high a priority. It's just a trade of rooks, but my two-pawn material lead looms ever so more dangerously against black. And there's some pieces in play to restrict black's movement along the back rank. This is going to be very restricting for black's king. He kind of gets to activate it anyway, and as a result of that, move to f7. c4 is good. We're playing against the knight, and the knight's going to have to be traded. All his moves are either blocked or covered by one of white's pieces or king or whoever. Right, so this, and he's under attack to a inferior valued piece. Inferior valued piece. The knight moves, and we're just going to trade him off. Move to the best spot available, because then black will at least get the bishop, the dark squared bishop, white's dark squared bishop back in exchange. It's time to activate a king. We notice when we're deciding where to move the king here that king to e2 looks good. If my opponent wants to play on f8, I can still contest the file, even with the king as far as I said e2, I meant e3. Even with the king as far as e3, white can still contest the file, as we happen to have a knight covering the f1 square. And so sometimes in a middle game you wouldn't want your knight to back up to f1, but in the end game the trade of rooks is just way more important than whether or not my knight happens to be on f1 at that point in time. We get captures on f1, and then this bishop is already sort of at a loss or a disadvantage, at least because of how many pawns I have on dark squares, where a light squared bishop will not be able to assail them. White, 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 right? So, so white would be doing well after a trade of rooks on f1. My opponent found a move. I don't want to say if it's tricky, but it's good. That wasn't it. Rook g8. I'll get back to later on. My opponent's going to play rook h8. I think it's a good move to play. For one, white's asleep at the board. We want to look at the whole board, Sam Seaborn. And if I play rook h1 to defend the h2 pawn, I've lost the game to bishop takes h1. Or maybe not lost the game right away, but it doesn't look good for white after losing his rook for nothing. So, but first my opponent played rook to g8. If he's planning to push, maybe to try to limit white's king, that's possible. But accelerate your opponent's plans. King to f4. I'm accelerating my opponent's plans. Black wants to push g5, but at the right moment. Sooner the better while the king's on e3, but once the king moves to f4, pushing to g5. I meant g5. Black wants to push to g5. The sooner the better. But now my king's in place on f4. It's too late. g5 check loses the pawn on g4. So we're within the theme of accelerate your opponent's plans. I learned this theme by watching Chessmaster 10, or was it Chessmaster 10 Grandmaster Edition? And Josh Waitzkin taught me this idea of accelerating your opponent's plans. We often see games which feature moves like h3, h6, and slightly less common a3 and a6. Roy Lopez, a6. Now these moves make a Luft. The king sometimes can avoid a back rank checkmate, and they're often putting the question to a bishop who is on a pin on g4. The bishop's on g4, but you accelerate your opponent's plans in some way that you're just barely a little bit too quick for their idea to work. So king to f4 is accelerating my opponent's plans. I saw if I established on f4, I couldn't be boxed out by the move pawn to g5. And if my opponent now wants to play like rook f8 check, I can capture on g4. And I'm safe enough that I'm not all that worried about king safety. And then one more pawn in white's coffers can't be a bad thing. Here's where my opponent found rook to h8. Another great move, threatening the pawn on h2. Do we want my opponent to climb in to the material arms race? Am I going to swing over and see that I'm protecting h2 if I move my rook to h1 and then gasp when my opponent captures on h1? So rook to h2, I thought this was an excellent move. Both really, I agree with Torch on both these moves. My opponent's really finding a lot of ways to probe for weakness in a spectacular fashion. At rook, rook to h8. My opponent wants me to just, hey, forget about it. Forget about the pawn and let the rooks sort of dance around in white's side, on white's camp, inside of the board. So rook to h2. I said I'll defend it just this lousy way. Here we are with this knight back on the first rank for white. This time it's actually not. This time it matters because there's more pieces on the board, and his whole job is to secure h2. So my opponent found these two great moves, and they're working well for him. Or they. Yeah, so moving the knight to e3 is a concession. If I had a lot of time on my clock, I might not have done so, but I think with knight to e3, what did I say, f3? Moving the knight to e3 is a bit of a concession. If I had a lot of time on my clock, I would search for something a bit stronger, like maybe solidifying the pawn on b2 by moving it to b3. Because I'll be protecting h2 for a very long time. I would say knight e3 was rushing things a bit against myself. I thought, knight takes g4, bishop takes g4, king takes g4, rook takes h2, or in a different order, rook takes h2 first is probably is better for black as it's black's turn anyway. And this is how the game ended. I'm in a very close king, pawn, and rook endgame. That was not what I would have intended. I think white would be better here to keep the knight on f2. Make things safer for attacks against g4 later on. So, for instance, maybe b4. Yeah, it's the skewer gets us. So here white's doing well. Let's see what the computer wants. The torch wants rook to e1. White's doing a little bit better than how the game went on it in real life, in the actual game. White's doing a little bit better here than what I played. So played knight to e3, rook to h2, and we did get our swap of minor pieces. White's in an endgame that is just slightly is favorable to white, but this progress is not certain when you're playing. Like if you play and you have a bishop and a pawn up, and everything else looks kind of like maneuvering, you know you have that bishop and a pawn up. When you're playing this game, you're playing against a strong player, a strong Bosnia-Herzegovinian player, and you have a one pawn advantage in a rook and king and pawn endgame. It's not quite as clear that you have that strong of an advantage as in this case 2.2. The computer is finding some dynamics in the position which don't immediately scream to me, except maybe that I'm probably gonna get g6 without too much of a struggle. Anyway, so we're going to try to keep pawns safe when attacked. Right? So I'm holding on to my pawns for the most part. I believe that's usually the recommendation for the player who has more pawns. I let that go now with rook to b1, giving up by c pawn, but white's gonna gain a more active rook. There's one shot against a6. g6 looks like that pawn. g6 looks like g6 might be next. And then to tie things up here, white does have the better position, more advanced pawns, more pawns total, and not only that, but black just got himself checkmated. We played this move. Let's play this against practice. Okay, it's the same move, same idea. Alright. See that worked really well. In the game itself, this threat, pawn to d6, remains very strong. My opponent missed uh, the best continuation for black would have been to step to c8, but then checkmate with rook to g8, and the game is over. Alright. Thank you for watching. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm More Gravity. Have a great night.